They call it the Mutiny of the Malagasy, the grand show of solidarity that brought down the government of Madagascar. Over the span of the last 3 weeks, young people across the nation have taken to the streets, joining a rising tide of fed-up, discontented Gen Zers pushing back against corrupt governments all across the globe. With the one-piece Jolly Roger flying high in the background, the young people demanded the downfall of President Andry Rajoelina, a man who has become synonymous with exploitation, elite corruption, and military rule. Today, Andry Rajoelina has fled the country. The nation's military has come out in force to support the protesters, and Madagascar's youth have given the nation a second chance. At the same time, Madagascar has found itself at the center of a political minefield where some paths lead to a military regime, some paths lead to more of the status quo, and there are only a few ways out where the nation and its people can realize a brighter future. On the islands in the Indian Ocean, Gen Z just overthrew another government. And what happens now is anybody's guess.
And now a quick word from our sponsor, me, or more precisely, my website, fronts.co. Have you ever found yourself thinking, there's just not enough content on WarFronts. 6 videos a week is just not enough for me. I want the world to be crazier. I want more war, more death. Well, 1, what's wrong with you? And 2, well, great news. Extra WarFronts content is now at your fingertips over at fronts.co. Look at that. Yes, starting this very week, we'll be posting 2 exclusive videos every week to our new subscriber-only website, fronts.co. For just $5 a month, you'll gain access to brand new WarFronts content that won't be available on YouTube. Our first videos are already up, exploring topics as timely as whether Poland could win a war against Russia, and as timeless as how South Korea came to build the best tank on Earth. And to sweeten the deal, we're also asking our writers to contribute 2 in-depth written articles each week, exploring some unusual or less appreciated angle on geopolitics and warfare. So, not only will you get more of the videos you love, you'll also get a chance to read some of our writers' unfiltered takes on war news. So look, if you like this channel, you'll love fronts.co. Again, $5 a month. It helps support us here at Fronts, WarFronts, Political Fronts, and fronts.co. And nothing is changing here. I have learned from the mistakes of past YouTubers. We are not doing a paywall on any existing content. The 6 videos a week will be here for you just as before. It's all just gravy, baby! Don't know why I went all Austin Powers there. But yeah, fronts.co. Just go there. Good domain, right? It was expensive.
Life in modern Madagascar is not awful, but it's not easy. Western audiences who might know Madagascar mostly for the combination of its lemurs and a 2005 DreamWorks film that still holds up today, by the way, might be disappointed to learn that Madagascar is one of the poorest nations in the world. There, 3 out of every 4 people live below the poverty line, including a high proportion of people who live in extreme poverty. Transportation and sanitation infrastructure are poor, the water supply is lacking, and the nation is subject to frequent rolling blackouts to try and keep the power system at least somewhat online. The island is one of the most vulnerable places in the world when it comes to natural diseases and the ebbs and flows of a changing climate. But running through all the nation's problems and making all of them worse at once is corruption. Rampant, extreme, and pretty damn shameless corruption. In this corner of the world, corruption isn't limited to a political leader here or a local official there. It is endemic. It is fundamental to the way that ordinary people and their political leaders do business, and it comes with disastrous repercussions for the population. Political patronage networks are baked deep into the system. Organized criminals collaborate with government officials regularly. Smuggling and trafficking occur at very high rates. And what little Madagascar actually has, you can be sure that the national elites are skimming off the top. At the center of Madagascar's political malaise is the man who's led the nation in one form or another since 2009, Andry Rajoelina. Once a media magnate, Rajoelina came to power through a military coup, and then ruled through a successor whose name, oh my lord, really? Harry Rajanaramapianina. Dude. Alright, it's on the screen. That's his name. Let's just call him HR. Then Rajoelina returned to power in 2019 and was re-elected under shady circumstances in 2023, despite having presided over a famine, making up his own COVID cure that didn't work, surprise, and has been implicated in the widespread use of spyware against his own people. To the extent that he's even given the most basic lip service to anti-corruption efforts, they've been exactly that. Lip service, where Angelina can sacrifice an underling here or a minister there in order to take the heat off the vast majority of people engaged in his larger corrupt system. Although Angelina has presided over a period of economic growth in Madagascar, he's also the reason that ordinary people haven't felt that growth, as new wealth is instead funneled into the maw of the corrupt regime. Suffice to say, things under Angelina haven't exactly been brilliant, and for young people especially, the outlook for the future has been very bleak for quite some time now. So, when a series of youth-led protests brought about the fall of a similarly corrupt government in Nepal and set off similar Gen Z protest movements everywhere from Morocco to Peru to the Philippines, the youth of Madagascar decided to get in on that game. Drawing on lessons learned from Nepal and elsewhere, Transparency International helped to organize the first of a series of rallies in Madagascar's capital city, Antananarivo. A few days later, prominent opposition leaders issued a public call to protest under a movement whose name translates to "We Refuse to be Trampled." Student organizations and youth leaders answered the call, adopting the imagery from the anime One Piece that we've discussed in a prior episode on this channel, and swapping out the show's traditional straw hat for a similar piece of headgear worn around Madagascar. Before long, protesters were gathering in the thousands, and the national police rallied to respond. Law enforcement regularly deployed tear gas and so-called less lethal rubber bullets, still perfectly capable of maiming or even killing a person if they get hit just right. Or wrong, I suppose. According to medical sources, the violence by state forces was far worse than that, with groups of protesters showing up dead with wounds consistent with the use of live ammunition. As of the time of writing, 22 protesters have died in Madagascar, along with hundreds injured, and the death toll may rise by the time this episode is released. As police stepped up their use of force, the protesters responded in kind, burning public infrastructure and other institutions that were seen as representing the garish spending of the national government in a time when ordinary people were hardly scraping by. Protesters quickly began to barricade the streets, and at times gatherings descended into looting, although on balance the protesters remained diligent in directing their outrage towards symbols of government excess. Nor were they shy about targeting members of the ruling elite, setting fire to the homes of politicians who were close allies of Angelina. As the protests grew more dangerous to attend, young people responded by mustering even greater numbers, now including a higher population of secondary schoolers. Labor unions organized a general strike, protests spread outward to the less populous provinces, and the world began to take notice. The Angelina government attempted to respond, of course, and they chose to focus their efforts in two key directions at once: controlling the narrative and working to appease the protesters enough to get them to calm down. In both cases, the government failed spectacularly. National police began to turn their weapons toward journalists, targeting and beating people who they knew to be members of the press on multiple occasions, while the government worked to rally counter-protesters and blunt the protests' momentum. The counter-protesters failed to turn out in large numbers and didn't seem to care about protecting Angelina nearly as much as Gen Z cared about bringing him down, while the efforts to silence journalists just made the press speak even louder about the movement. As for appeasement, Angelina offered to fire ministers and even announced in late September that he would dissolve his entire government. But those were half measures, and the protesters knew that. They continued their work in the streets and continued to make their message to Angelina crystal clear. We don't care about them. We're coming for you. Alright, so it's about at this point in the story that Madagascar's Gen Z protest movement starts to take on a different tone, and although we understand that it risks diluting the protesters' message, it's absolutely essential that we talk about it. What happened next in Madagascar, for better or for worse, was a military coup. Now, we should be very clear here that Angelina and his government had started crying foul about the protesters attempting a coup long before anything to that effect actually happened. But it's time that we introduce one final player into this story, a particular military unit called CAPSAT. Now look, CAPSAT isn't a frontline unit in Madagascar's small and quite underpowered military, but because of the role that CAPSAT fills, the rest of the country's military has to listen when it chooses to act. CAPSAT basically oversees many aspects of the country's largest military branch, its army, from personnel to logistics to all the other functions that keep the military in working order. But they're also important here because of their history. Back in 2009, it was CAPSAT that intervened directly to elevate Madagascar's current leader, President Angelina himself, and for CAPSAT to be feeling buyer's remorse on the president sends a louder message than, well, just about anything else. Rajoelina hasn't been popular among the Capsat ranks for some time. Instead, the unit is led by elites who've been marginalized by the Rajoelina government, but who still have extensive connections all up and down Madagascar society. Capsat has authority over the army, pool with the national elite, and the historical precedent to be the authority on regime change in Madagascar, and on the 11th of October 2025, Capsat chose to take to the streets. When they did, the unit's leaders called on the nation's entire military to step up, support, and protect the Gen Z movement in the streets. Their forces joined up with protesters in massive columns, and by the end of the day, they'd locked down the central neighborhoods in the capital. Despite occasional limited firefights, Capsat faced no real opposition in seizing control of the city streets, and before long, the unit turned its attention toward locking down the rest of the country. Rajoelina took notice and publicly decried what was happening as a military coup, but insisted, at least for about a day, that he retained power over the nation and would deal with the Capsat mutiny. But by the evening hours, on the 13th of October, the game was up for Rajoelina, who was revealed to have fled the country. According to France 24's Madagascar correspondent, Rajoelina, quote, left in his helicopter from the presidential palace to the island of Saint-Marie in the east of the country, where a French military aircraft was waiting for him. The transfer lasted a few minutes at the end of the runway. No one saw the president board the military aircraft, and thanks to the French army, he was able to reach the island of Reunion. There, another plane was waiting for him, a private jet from the German company VistaJet, who took the president to Dubai, where he arrived this Monday morning. It was a daring and secretive escape, assisted by the French government and pulled off without a hitch, but in a practical sense, it meant Rajoelina had admitted checkmate. The president had fled the country, the old corrupt government had fallen, and Madagascar's students and its soldiers had taken back control of their nation. Now, at this point, we should issue a quick caveat, because although we've caught up to what's happening in Madagascar at the time of writing, there's a good chance that the situation will continue to evolve by the time you see this episode. As such, everything we've discussed today is accurate as of midnight, headed into Tuesday, October the 14th, local time in Antananarivo. Most recently, at that time, Rajoelina has finally made a long-awaited address to the nation from afar, claiming that he fled to a safe place in order to protect his own life. It's not clear whether he'll agree to step down or attempt to form a government in exile, but at least for the short term, it appears that Rajoelina and his close allies do not intend to quickly return home. Right now, the most important question to answer is a question in two parts. Who's in charge right now, and who are they going to place in charge moving forward? Madagascar does still have a robust political opposition, and Rajoelina is likely to be impeached in absentia, but the situation on the ground is pretty complicated. According to opposition leaders speaking anonymously to the global press, there are now fears that Capsat is essentially taking direct control of the nation, especially since the unit appointed a new chief of staff for the army, who would in turn take direct command of the unit and thus exercise practical control over the island. Remember, Capsat came out in force to join the protest movement, but they are deeply tied in with Madagascar's political and business elite, just sections of the elite that didn't have much love for Rajoelina himself. The nation's defense minister may also be in a position to exercise direct control. He didn't flee the country, like others of Rajoelina's former ministers, and he's reportedly become a power broker in close meetings with political, civic, and religious leaders. The fact that those meetings are happening at all might be a good sign, but unfortunately, it's far too early to know for sure. Even if power is transferred peacefully to new civilian leaders, there are no guarantees that Madagascar's student protesters are going to witness the change they wanted to bring about. As we said at the outset of this episode, corruption is endemic across Madagascar's political elite, and that's just as true for the opposition as it is for Rajoelina and his close allies. The national military, led in this moment by Capsat, is in the position to throw its support behind leaders who will further its preferred objectives, and there are no guarantees that Capsat will choose to honor ideals of democracy and anti-corruption instead of looking for ways to line their own pockets and the pockets of their elite allies. At a moment when Gen Z protests are on the rise, this is the danger that comes from this type of mass mobilization. Try to overthrow the government without a plan for what comes next, and people who do have a plan for what comes next may co-opt that movement in order to advance themselves. We certainly hope that's not what's happening in Madagascar, but right now, there's a place for a bit of healthy skepticism, isn't there? Now, with luck, the thing that comes next in Madagascar will be a grand national dialogue, bringing together student protest leaders, trusted voices from political and civil society, and the most effective anti-corruption advocates that Madagascar has to offer. If the nation's leaders are able to meet the challenge of this moment, Madagascar could set itself on a path to far greater prosperity for all its people and toward a brighter future than the one that existed under Rajoelina. But as difficult and as bloody as the Gen Z protests were in Madagascar, they were still the easy part. The real challenge, to chart a path out of a legacy of endemic corruption, starts now. Thank you for watching.